and welcome back to another edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast. I'm Raffi, your host, as always, joined by Davian. Unfortunately, no Theodore today, so we will be not hitting our quota of Roll Tides. Davian, I expect you to help us reach that. Today, if that intro didn't give a clue to what we're talking about today, we're doing our college football preview. So we're talking about all the 5 power conferences, breaking down our winners, breaking down who we have in our college football playoff. For the last time, it will be 4 teams, so we'll break that down later on as well at the end. But before all of that, as always, Davian, how are you?
I'm good. It's orientation week, so I've had no sleep whatsoever. I met a couple hockey players yesterday, so that's cool. One of them is actually going to the Dallas Stars. I think for privacy reasons, I won't be mentioning his name, but I'm sure if you guys look up Cornell hockey team, you can figure it out. And so, yeah, that's basically it. Raffi, how you been?
I've been well. Classes start on Monday, tomorrow, as we're recording this on Sunday. So by the time this podcast goes up, we will be in the start of the semester. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, things are going to get rolling. So we will be sure to still stay on top of everything. Be sure to follow us also on TikTok as well, Benchwarmer_sports.
We're
Hop on the
out
wagon.
there.
We're booming. Business is booming, as one Antonio Brown with a little bit of CTE would say. So hop on the ride, join us, and help us reach whatever following goals we have set out for ourselves. But let's get into our college football breakdown. So there's 5 conferences we're going to be talking about today. The reason why we're not talking about the American Athletic Conference, which I believe we did discuss last year, is due to many of those top teams being BYU, Cincinnati, UCF, all moving now to the Big 12. That being said, Davian, I want to give you the floor because I know you have one team that you'd like to talk about. So we'll get that out of the way before we get into the Power 5 conferences.
Right. Okay. I want to talk about Tulane. Well, Tulane, yes, they lost a ton of players in the past year. Tajay Spears is no longer on the team. But I think that they're a really solid team overall. Great coach. I think they're going to win it. They're going to win the conference. I have almost no doubt about it. They're ranked at the AP rankings, have them top 25. They should be top 15, honestly, borderline top 15. I've been on the hype. I've been on the Tulane hype train before. It was cool, and I'm going to continue to stay on the Tulane hype train. And we're going to talk about this later. But once I think that the college football playoffs turn into a 12-team instead of 4-team kind of playoff, I seriously think that Tulane is going to be one of those 12 teams there.
Definitely on the up and up. Obviously, they were kind of down in the dumps for a couple of years,
and now,
especially last year, they had a big boost, and certainly expecting them to take that next step. As I mentioned too, with a lot of the big teams or the larger teams that normally have been taking over the ACC, being your Cincinnati, your UCF, and then BYU coming from another conference as an independent to the Big 12. It seems like it's Tulane's time to really cement themselves as one of the top dogs in the AAC. But let's get into the other conference that starts with an A, the ACC, the American Coastal Conference, as I believe it is called. And this is going to be a very interesting conference, Davian, because you have Clemson, who is your notorious, like, this team is always the best team in the ACC, always taking it over. You have Notre Dame. Oh, wait, no, shoot, sorry. Notre Dame's not in the conference anymore. They're not in a conference, but we can ramble about Notre Dame later on for their own individual segment, as they would pay us $41 million to do. But you also have Florida State, and Florida State won a close game versus LSU to start the season last year and really, really played well throughout the entire season. Jordan Travis is coming back. They have a really, really solid running back with Trey Benson. They have a solid wide receiver with Johnny Wilson, both guys expected to potentially be high draft picks when they are eligible. They also have Jared Verse, who's projected to be a top 15, top 10 edge rusher or just top 10 pick in the NFL draft upcoming. So they certainly have some great pieces and are definitely looking to take that next step. As I mentioned, Jordan Travis. Then you also have two other teams in UNC and NC State that can also cause some chaos. So I think the ACC is not as clear as it has been in the past, where normally you just think Clemson's going to be the winner.
Yeah, it's definitely not. But I'm going to be honest with you, Raffi. Everything you said about Florida State is why I think that Florida State's going to be winning the ACC. I think the reign of Clemson's over. I think that Clemson's lost a ton of players, and I think that the Florida State is just a solid team that's coming. Like, they're not losing anybody, right? As you just mentioned, their quarterback, their running back, their main edge rusher. I think what's important for a college team, and I kind of, I'll go off of this a bit later on, is you want to have the players coming back, and you also want to have a good team culture. And I think that's what Florida State has compared to that, they really had last year as well. I think they went 10-4 last year, pretty good record. I think that they win the ACC, and it might not be something where they like, it might not be that they might not have like the best record at the end of the day in the ACC, but I think that they will be winning the ACC, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I have Florida State as well, as I mentioned, for my points, and you backing me up, so I appreciate that. I think it's Florida State's time to cement themselves as the big dog in the ACC like they were back in the Jameis Winston days. They're going to eat some W's, as one Jameis Winston would say. The big thing, too, and this is going to be a recurring theme that I carry out throughout the entire show, with a couple exceptions, is Clemson has a new quarterback, and that is Cade Klubnik, if I said his name right, Klubnik, whatever. I'm sorry if you're watching this podcast and if I said your name wrong. People say my name wrong all the time. It's no big deal.
Same here. Don't worry about it.
But with this new quarterback, I always am hesitant to pick a team who's having a new quarterback. I always feel better about a returning QB who had success the past year than a new guy. That's why I also like Derek May and UNC. I think obviously Sam Howell was drafted recently, but now you have Derek May. Derek May could be what we thought Sam Howell was going to be in his draft year. If Derek May can take that step and cement himself as that second quarterback in the draft, I think North Carolina is going to be very good. But again, my main concern with UNC, as it was last year and years prior, is the defense. The defense is going to be the big thing. You lost Michael Carter and the other running back. I'm blanking on their name, but I know you know who I'm talking about, Davian.
I do.
So they're lacking some offensive weapons, but the key thing too is that defense, which I think is really going to hurt UNC. And one of the reasons why I think Clemson will be good this year is because of their defense. So it's just going to be, can Florida State's offense overwhelm Clemson's defense, which will be certainly interesting to see.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right about that. I think that the UNC is a really good team overall on paper, but I do have concerns about them, and those concerns is why I'm choosing Florida State. With Clemson, I agree. New QB, I'm not really trusting it. They also lost a ton of players last year. I mean, but one thing I will tell you, Raffi, is that Clemson, there are certain programs that they will lose a ton of players, but they will continue to come back and continue to dominate. Roll Tide. I think that Clemson's one of those programs where they're able to, year after year become a juggernaut, and that's what they have been. So I am worried about them having a new QB. I don't know how much it will affect their overall performance. I think in the beginning it'll be rough, and they might pick it up later on. But still, I think at the end of the day, Florida State's going to win this. It's just a solid program, a solid team. And there's nothing more that you could look for in really a champion in a conference.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see any of these teams in the ACC really being that 11-1, 12-0 team where they just are cementing themselves in the college football playoff. But I still think it's likely going to be Florida State who comes out of the ACC. Obviously, time will tell. We'll get to watch this back in the coming weeks and coming months, so it'll be fun to see how right we were and how wrong we were. Moving on to the Big 12. The Big 12 is very interesting this year because now you have Cincinnati, UCF, BYU. You have some new teams right now in the Big 12 that are likely going to shake some things up, at least in the college football realm. And we'll see what happens, obviously, when college basketball season comes around. But getting back to football, I think it just has to be Texas's time, Davian. I don't know if it's not now, and obviously you have Arch Manning, who's your current backup quarterback behind Quinn Ewers, who's likely going to be the starter next year, absolutely. I think the time is now for Steve Sarkisian to take the realm and make Texas a team that is good enough to make the college football playoff. I think if they keep being a middling team where they're losing 3-4 games, maybe losing 2 games, just missing out on the college football playoff, I think Sarkisian might get fired and might get the boot. So I think this is a really big make it or break it year for Texas. I have them winning. I like their offense still, even without Bijan Robinson, who is now a member of my very own Atlanta Falcons, which I'm so happy to be a fan of sometimes. Davian, I know you're chuckling in the background. But I just think it's Texas's time this year, and I really do anticipate in Texas last year in the Big 12, they say we're back, and then they look forward to next year when they're a part of the SEC.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to have to disagree with you on that. I have TCU, and I know this is completely hypocritical of what I just said, so if you watch different clips of this podcast, you'll think I have 2 different mindsets. TCU is coming off a great year. It's built a program of a winning culture, and I seriously think that TCU is going to end up winning the Big 12. I know they didn't win it last year, but it's going to be tough. Don't get me wrong. I just think that their program is going to get these young players moving fast and really get them up to speed. so that they compete against Texas and compete against Kansas State and all those teams. But I agree with you. If it's not TCU, it's going to be Texas. It's a solid program. They have their future's looking bright. Like, even if they don't win it this year, next year they definitely are. Like, next year you will see me here saying like Texas is winning well, I guess it'll be the SEC at that point. But they have such a solid program, and I know that the competition will change, especially once they join the SEC. But I don't see how they are not a successful team, and how they don't make it into the college football playoffs at least next year. Not this year, but next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And this year, too, for Texas is going to be a big year because Baylor's supposed to be an underrated team this year. Oklahoma, I don't think they're going to be as good as they were with Lincoln Riley, and then when they had Spencer Rattler, Jalen Hurts, etc. in that era. But I still expect them to be better than last year, because last year they absolutely the wheels quite literally fell off their wagon for making a wagon joke for Oklahoma. But again, you have Baylor. Texas actually plays Alabama the second week of the season at Alabama. So that's going to be a big game for Texas. And if they can win that game, that can kind of set the tone for the entire season, which I'm banking on, because they played really well versus Alabama last year until Quinn Ewers did get hurt earlier.
Don't matter.
The things fell off the wagon again for Texas. But Texas is a team that I think can really cement themselves if they get that win versus Alabama in Tuscaloosa. That's going to be great. Hopefully Theodore is going to be at that game and can record and get some good clips for that, for the YouTube and for the TikTok. And then obviously, as you mentioned, there's still TCU. BYU's addition is certainly going to help Texas's resume out, because BYU is always a solid team. Kansas State and our team that I feel like is always under the radar, but is always going to be good. They lost Deuce Vaughn, who's now rocking it right now with the Cowboys. We'll see what happens with him in his NFL career. But even with him gone, I still expect Kansas State to always just be a formidable team, and a team that has really had Texas's number in the past. So that's arguably their next biggest hurdle, aside from their Week 2 matchup versus Alabama. Yeah. Moving on, let's get into the Pac-12, which is currently dissolving as we know it, and likely will keep its name, but we'll just be adding a bunch of Mountain West teams, and you'll have your Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford all together. We'll see what happens with Stanford. We talked about this before on past podcasts with what's going to happen with the Pac-12, so you guys can check that out. It's on our YouTube channel. But the Pac-12 is a conference that, like I said last year, I think they're going to cannibalize each other. Again, I would not be surprised if the Pac-12, we just see a bunch of teams with 2-3 losses, just because you have Utah. Utah is always good. Cam Rising's returning, and we all know that I love returning quarterbacks. Utah was really good this past year. They didn't really lose too many players to the draft or from aging out. So Utah, once again, I expect to just be a great team. They have a good culture, and sometimes you just need that culture, something the Jaguars didn't have 2 years ago with Urban Meyer. But I think Utah does have that culture, so I expect Utah to likely win the Pac-12. But you also have Oregon with Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr. I made sure to emphasize that it's an X and not any other letter that it might be. Can't imagine how that could be misinterpreted differently. But also projected top 10 pick, as I mentioned, Bo Nix in our projected top 10 pick. And obviously, the best quarterback in the draft right now projected is Caleb Williams. So you have USC there too. You have 4 teams, and this doesn't even include Oregon State, as I mentioned earlier, who has DJ Uiagalelei, as I pretty much got that name. So I really do think that the Pac-12 is just going to cave in. They're all going to cannibalize each other. And I have Utah winning, but you can really make an argument for a lot of these teams. You can make an argument that Cal won't win it, but that's the only thing that I'm concerned with for the Pac-12.
Yeah, so I was going to say the Colorado Builders, just for, poops and giggles. But I'll have to go Oregon. And I think it's just their time at this point. This is like what Bo Nix's last year, if we're gonna be honest, right? So in the end of the day, like I think this is the year that they make it. I think that they go against USC in the Pac-12 championship, and they just kind of collapse. USC will collapse, and Oregon will win. Don't sleep on the Boulders, though. I'm telling you, man. Like you talk about cannibalism, I think this Boulders team, it's prime time for them. I don't mean in the literal sense and actual in the metaphorical sense. It is prime time for them. I see Oregon winning it. But I also completely see why you would say Utah would win it. They're a very solid program. They did very well last year. So yeah.
Yeah, and once again, too, USC is highly regarded as the team to be in the Pac-12. But my big problem which was their Achilles heel last year, was their defense. And
Right.
you can try to patch it up with the transfer portal. They didn't really bring in any high caliber five-star players on their defense, and that's going to be their Achilles heel. They still have Caleb Williams, so that's definitely going to take them far enough. Their offense is still going to be really good. Lincoln Riley is an offensive mastermind. But again, my problem with USC just comes down to the defense. The defense is what hurt them last year. They were not able to mask that into making the college football playoff. So USC could make it next year when they're a member of the Big Ten into the college football playoff when it's expanded. But this year, I just don't think it's their time right now, just because you have the great offense, but the defense just does not complement a team that I feel like would be a top 4 team in the nation.
Defense wins championships.
And that's why Utah and Oregon are probably your 2 top teams and all they could. Washington always has an underrated defense too, but I just think Utah and Oregon are, as you mentioned with Oregon, and as I'm saying with Utah, are like going to be the 2 top dogs for the Pac-12. Moving on to the team or to the conference that's taking USC and UCLA this upcoming year, not this year, but the year after, the Big Ten. Big Ten
Go Blue.
has been run by Michigan the past 2 years.
And it will continue to be run by Michigan.
Yeah, I have that same thing as well. I think Michigan has a pretty nice schedule. And let's be honest here, the Big Ten, at least this year, you have 3 top teams: Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. Maryland, I've heard things about. Watch out for them. They might fly under the radar. Obviously, they have Tagovailoa. They have Talia Tagovailoa, who's Tua Tagovailoa's younger brother. So he might take a next step. And that will be interesting to see. Illinois, another team that's underrated, but I don't expect them to make it all. I mean, they might make the Big Ten championship just because the other competition is Wisconsin. But no, not Rutgers. Sorry,
Rutgers. I'm telling you guys, don't sleep on Rutgers. Don't sleep on Rutgers.
There really is 3 teams, being Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. They all play against each other at the end of the season, so that's really going to be the key to seeing who comes out on top. I have Michigan winning, as I mentioned. Again, the same theme. Sean Clifford's gone at Penn State. C.J. Stroud's gone at Ohio State. Who is the remaining quarterback for Michigan? Oh, it's just J.J. McCarthy, who was their quarterback last year. And they were great last year. And the big thing, too, they have Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum were rushing for over 200 yards versus the Ohio State University last year when they played against each other. Their run defense, Ohio State, I don't know if it got any better. My concern still is with that defense. And yes, you still have Marvin Harrison Jr., who is arguably the top wide receiver entering this upcoming NFL draft. And they have a loaded offense. But my concern with the Ohio State University is on defense. And that's why Michigan, even though they lost some guys, I still expect Michigan to be the big team to come out of the Big Ten.
I'm not going to add anything more to the Big Ten. I think we should move on to the SEC.
Yeah.
So I would just like to say Roll Tide, and then I'd like to say again Roll Tide, and I'd like to say again Roll Tide. My Roll Tide count right now is at 9. Let's make it 10. So Roll Tide. Look, Bama is just the team to beat in the SEC, and they're not getting defeated. All right, it's going to be a much closer, much more competitive SEC than it was in the past few years. Don't get me wrong. And I think next year it's going to be a big question whether Bama continues to dominate the SEC, but still, again, Roll Tide. I think that they're just going to be the dominant team. Most of their players coming back. The program is just the best it could be. Transfer portal, they got a ton of players, got a ton of 5-star recruits, which honestly, actually, that's one thing I want to comment about Oregon real quick. They got a lot of 5-star recruits over the past, in the past transfer portal. Almost like borderline shockingly, because compared to the other programs that they're competing with to try and recruit these players like Bama and really just big football programs, which I'm not saying Oregon isn't, but I was surprised to see Oregon get so many players. But again, Roll Tide, make that 12 now. All right, Raffi, I'll give you the 4 to make that actual educated guess.
Yeah. So I'm so sorry to pump your Roll Tide train and pump the brakes with that. And this will be mentioned kind of as a hint to what my top 4 teams in my college football playoff will be as we get into that in the upcoming segment. I have Alabama as the second best team in their division behind LSU. Now, I know what you're saying. Raffi, use your logic. Okay, Alabama has a new quarterback. That's what. No, it's not. It's actually not that. Alabama is one of the only teams that I'm comfortable with them having a new quarterback after every year and expecting them to not drop off at any point. My concern is the wide receiver position, because last year we saw what happened with Bryce Young, and Bryce Young was still phenomenal as a quarterback. I think we all can agree that Bryce Young was the best quarterback in college football. Arguably, C.J. Stroud was good at the end, but Bryce Young collectively was one of the top quarterbacks in college football last year. Bryce Young is gone. And one of the big keys and one of the big Achilles heels for Alabama was they had a ton of issues with wide receivers dropping the ball. They had a lot of guys who were inexperienced. And going into this year, you can say, Raffi, they're going to be more experienced now. But still, the problem still is, have these guys taken that next step? And that is a concern for me. And when I look at a team like Georgia, Georgia has Brock Bowers. Georgia has other players returning on offense that I can rely on more than Alabama. It's as simple as that. And at the end of the day, too, again, we'll see what happens with Alabama. They have a tough schedule. They play Ole Miss. They play Tennessee, which I'll get into later on. LSU, they play Texas, as I mentioned earlier on in the year. And the big thing for me for Alabama is, can their quarterback, can someone take that starting job and run with it? And how are the wide receivers going to play for this Alabama team? So I don't think Alabama is going to win the SEC this year. I actually have Georgia, just because I feel a bit more comfortable. Yes, they also have a new quarterback, Carson Beck, expected to be the starter. He is a rising sophomore, I believe. And they just have a great defense too. So I just feel a bit better right now about Georgia than I do about Alabama.
The one comment I'll say about Georgia is I wasn't very comfortable with their QB situation over the summer, how they really didn't exactly know who was going to be. I mean, there was rumors that was going to be Carson Beck. But I'm also, I don't know, he's a sophomore at the end of the day. He only got to sit one year behind Stetson Bennett. I don't know how well he knows the program. And it's such a poor argument because there's other QBs that, other teams I mentioned where the QBs have been just as, been there as long as Georgia's QB is right now. So either way, I'm just not on the Georgia hype train as of yet. I think they also lost some big pieces on defense, right? Like Jalen Carter and whatnot. So, so yeah, I still see Bama roll Tide again. That's 13. Roll Tide again, 14 times.
And it's a fair point, but if you look at Georgia's schedule, Georgia has a much easier schedule being in the SEC West as opposed to SEC East. And once again, too, what we're going to see this year is how good was Bryce Young making that Alabama offense look this past year. Yeah. Because with Bryce Young being gone and a new quarterback taking the helm, you're going to have the same weapons that were having these drop issues and not clicking too well last year. So we're really going to see Alabama, I don't expect to massively fall off. They're still an amazing all-around team. And it'd be foolish if I had them outside of the top 10. But I think that there's a realistic possibility that Alabama could be a 3-loss team this year. At very least a 2-loss team, just because I think they have a really tough schedule. And once again, with me pumping Texas up to be who they are, that's already 1 loss. And I have a feeling that LSU, which has their returning quarterback, they have Jane Daniels, who came from Arizona State last year. He played really well for LSU last year. LSU lost that early game versus Florida State and missing an extra point, I believe it was. And then they got blown out by Tennessee. But the rest of the way, and we saw this versus Alabama, LSU was a very good team. And potentially, if they hadn't lost one of those 2 games, if the ball bounced their way versus Florida State in week 1, there was a good case for LSU to be the 4th team in the college football playoff last year. Yeah. So LSU, I think they didn't really lose anyone offensively. They didn't really lose anyone on the defensive side. So LSU, I think, honestly, is likely going to take the spot of the SEC East when we look at who's coming out of the SEC. So I think LSU versus Georgia, and I expect Georgia to win. I think I might have split the SEC East and SEC West, but my point still stands.
Yeah.
Georgia versus LSU, Georgia winning the SEC.
All right. Okay. Let's just move on because roll Tide. Make that 15. Who do I think
Theodore is not on this podcast?
Yeah, there would have been like at least 30 roll Tides. Oh, there you go. That's 16. Wow. Okay, so let's talk about the college football playoffs. Raffi, I want to hear your picks. It's gonna be a very interesting. I mean, kind of if we look at broad sense, right? Like we were saying earlier, right? This is the last year that we have the 4-team college football format. So again, it's going to be very restrictive. There's going to be teams that we think that should have made it that don't. Next year, hopefully we don't have those problems. I highly doubt we will because there's 12 teams now being selected. But Raffi, I want to hear your picks. Who do you have in the top 4?
Yeah, so starting off with number one, I have the University of Michigan. I expect them to beat the Ohio State University. I expect them to beat Penn State. And aside from that, they don't really have too many other teams that they're playing in the Big Ten that I think pose a true threat to Michigan. And even if Michigan were to pick up a loss at any point in the season, I really do expect Michigan at the worst being a one-loss team. And even as a one-loss team, I still expect them to win the Big Ten championship potentially, or even if they don't make the Big Ten championship because they lose to the Ohio State or Penn State in a tiebreaker, I still expect Michigan to be in the college football playoffs. So I have Michigan at 1 currently. I just think their offense is very potent. I love their run game. They have a very good defense. And 5 years ago, Raffi would be bashing his head against the wall over what I'm saying now, but it's true. Michigan is the best team, I think, entering this college football season, aside from maybe Georgia, who I have at number 2. Georgia, the big thing, as I said before, they just have a very easy schedule this year. And I think Georgia is going to have an easy time. If Georgia, worst case, slips up once, I don't think it's going to be a big deal. And I still expect Georgia to be that number 2 spot. Number 3, I have the Ohio State University. Yes, I kind of dug them through the mud with their quarterback situation and also talked about their defense. But I still expect Ohio State to be one of the top 4 teams they were last year. I expect them to be one of the top teams again this upcoming year. We'll see what happens at quarterback. But I think Marvin Harrison Jr. just makes any quarterback better. So that's a great security blanket for any quarterback who's taking on that position.
Right.
Even I just throw it up to take the ball and chuck it up to him. He'll do all the work. Just get the ball out and you'll be fine. And then lastly, I have Texas once again in make or break year in the Big 12. I don't know how good they're going to be next year with Arch Manning when they're in the SEC. So this year, I think is going to be the big year for Texas to really break through. I'm backing my Armenian brother and Steve Sarkisian. I think they're going to do well this year. I never thought I'd do this again. Man, 5 years ago, Raffi would not be proud of me here. But don't worry, Notre Dame's still overrated. I still have that. I will not go to the dark side there, but
good. All right, Raffi.
Texas is back.
I'm going to have to disagree with you a bit. I will agree with you on one thing, though. My number 1 team is Michigan. I don't see any team that's really better than them out there. My number 2 team is actually Oregon. I think Oregon has a really, really good season. I know.
Wow.
I know. It's bold. It's bold. I know last year I kind of joked about Oregon really being a good team. I think this year, this is their year. I don't know, but I mean, I say that and they're going to choke like week 5 and they're going to be like completely out of the college football. Like,
I really look forward to sharing that with you.
Yeah. No, I look forward to be being clowned upon, but like in the small chance that they actually do really well, like Tulane did. Honestly, that was like the best pick I've ever had. Tulane beating USC. And then I got LSU. And again, then I got LSU, and then after that I got Roll Tide, Bama. Whoop, whoop. I don't know why
Georgia not making,
but yeah.
Did you? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but you don't have Georgia in your top 4.
No, I do not.
Wow.
I'm sorry. It's a new QB at the end of the day.
Yeah, I get it. It's a fair point. It's a fair criticism. I get it. But my big thing, too, is I think Georgia just has a much easier
They do have an easy schedule.
And my thing, too, is LSU and Alabama are together in the same conference. So are you expecting then Alabama to go undefeated or Alabama or LSU to go undefeated and then the other one only loses once to the other team?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I think that's my that's my theory. So I think that's why I think LSU like it's either gonna be LSU. So I right now having LSU at 3rd means that I don't think Bama wins the SEC. I think Bama does win the SEC, but ignoring that comment, this is like the only way I see really Bama making it. Otherwise, yeah, I don't. I see Georgia. I do see Georgia. I really do. At some point, but talk to me week 2 after I watch Peck a bit play. And my thoughts will probably be different. If he lives up to his hype, if he lives up to the Georgia college football program, then you know what? Yeah, probably Georgia will be in the top. Will be in the college football playoffs. But for now, at least we can both agree on Michigan.
Yes.
And I think it's gonna be very sad when it's gonna be November, and Michigan somehow has 2 losses. And yeah,
that would be crazy if that does happen. JJ McCarthy is gonna have to regress massively to to ridiculous levels if Michigan were to wind up being a 2-loss team. Another thing too, I will mention this to you Notre Dame sicko fans that like this team. Well, first off, why? But second off, I'll get into Sam Hartman is going to be their quarterback this upcoming season, transferring from Wake Forest. Theodore, if you check out our podcast where we did this last year, was a big fan of Sam Hartman. I'm sure he still is. I am speaking on behalf of him, but regardless. So Notre Dame's not a bad team this year, but like they do have a harder schedule though. They play Ohio State, they play USC, so they have some tougher matches. But again, Notre Dame overrated, outside the top 25 at the end of the season. Is that ridiculous? Yes. Is that biased? Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're gonna start off. We're just gonna end the podcast on a bit of a fiery take and just say Notre Dame outright misses the top 25. Doesn't even happen. So that'll do it for this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. We hope you enjoyed. Let us know who you guys think is going to win the Power 5 conferences. Who do you guys have in your top 4 in the college football playoff? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, hit a like as well on this video, and also follow us on TikTok, Benchwarmer_sports. Business is booming. We'd love to have you hop on the ride. So we look forward to seeing you guys on all of our channels. So for Davian, for Theodore, for Carlos, I'm Raffi. We hope you enjoyed and have a great rest of your day. See ya.
Peace.